Welcome to Digital Talk Podcast, where we spotlight entrepreneurs and innovators leveraging technology related to telecoms to drive positive global impact. As a wrap-up to Network X, today we'll be talking to two of the top industry analysts, Camille Mendler from Omdia and Gabriel Brown from Heavy Reading. Network X is now in its third year, and it's the crossroads of various parts of the industry. This year, having 5 tracks: fiber, optical transport, Wi-Fi networks and services, mobile networks, and mobile services. On top of that, you have Connected France and a startup and scale-up program and competition as well. So I think it's going to be an interesting and exciting discussion.
Today's episode is sponsored by IFG Consulting Europe, a leading business growth consultancy representing promising software providers selling to telecoms, enterprise and mobile markets in Europe. Go to ifgconsultingeurope.com to find out more.
So without further ado, let me welcome our guests. So first of all, Gabriel, how are you?
Hey, yeah, I am very well, thanks.
Thanks for joining the podcast. And Camille?
Yeah, doing great. Thanks very much. Great to be here.
So we're all at the event. Maybe to help tee this up, I noticed that this was at the same time as MWC Las Vegas. And from the numbers that I've also heard, that actually the attendance for Network X was double that of MWC Las Vegas. And we also had the situation of they've had an increase of attendees by almost 20%. Then one important number related to the whole event was that supposedly it was the wettest day recorded in Paris ever on Wednesday of the show. So what do we think is the state of the industry? Have we got any views of that? Dario Talmesio gave an opening speech and I think was quite upbeat about that. Maybe, Gabriel, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, I don't know anything about the numbers you're talking about, but certainly I can see what you're saying about the rain. It rained a lot, so it's definitely that. But I love Paris and it was a great event. Had a good time and met a lot of people right across the industry. Dario's kind of analyst keynote, I think, obviously Dario's a colleague and I think he landed it really well. It's quite a hard thing to do. Analyst keynote at a big event like that. How do you land it? What's your sort of emphasis? What are you going to say? Because you've got to be interesting, right? To everybody. That's the main thing. You've got to make something that's a little bit thought-provoking.
Do you remember any particular part of his keynote which you would like to recall?
Yeah, I think just the overall theme really was he gave a pretty wide, eagle-eye overview of the industry. And I suppose the standout point was that the industry's doing okay. You can always look at industry however you want, really. So it depends on your vantage point and things. But essentially, it was a kind of, this industry's doing all right. There are reasons to be positive. And he went through quite a few of them, which was essentially revenues and cash flow. They're not flying and they're not growing massively, but they are on an upward track. Operators have made a lot of progress on their major projects. So this is what I think this is the main thing going on. There are 3 main things telcos are focused on. One is fixed fiber access.
Yes.
The other is 5G build out and creating the service offer on top of that. And then there's everything related to data center and cloud. We could have a fourth ask Camille about the enterprise play as well. And my read of it is this year, the state of the industry, essentially, they're grinding. The whole industry is grinding and working through and towards these targets that were set a few years ago, really.
Yes.
And it's working out pretty well. Like we haven't really hit the kind of full fruition of all these initiatives. There is progress and it's looking pretty good, basically.
Good. And Camille, do you have a comment on that?
I think we need to remind ourselves that Network X is what was the Broadband World Forum, which was around for many years. And the mere fact that it was renamed and rejuged up, nice technical term from me, Network X, tells you about how the industry has needed to evolve. Now, quite frankly, the discussion, the presentations that some of the opening presentation that Gabriel refers to is a reflection of modest mediocrity in a market in an industry that has been struggling. And quite frankly, had he been more negative, he might have been sent out into the rain with pitchforks. And you have to think about the audience there as well and give some level of hope to the brethren assembled. There are modest signs of health and growth, but they are certainly not those that venture capital is looking for, nor indeed many large egoed CEOs that believe there is dramatic growth in what is effectively a utility stock of 150 years in the making.
That's good. I think one of the things I picked up was the costs. They are trying to drive out some of the costs out of it, and they are being effective. So the margin's increasing. And there was some number of, I've got here, 272 billion of free cash flow generated to industry. But just to come back to Camille, your point of, there was someone asked the question, but what happens if we add inflation to the growth numbers? Suddenly it didn't look quite as positive. But maybe it's a good way of segueing to another topic, as nicely described there by Gabriel about the 5G. I think he also highlighted that he said some of the main operator groups now are particularly moving to what I call it proper 5G. Maybe Camille has a better way of describing it, but it's 5G SA, that lots of the operator groups are now beginning to deploy it.
I'm heartily grateful for the fact that we are finally moving to 5G standalone, having promised these great riches and these great dynamic experiences for a number of years. And let's not forget, 5G today, if you count telecom years as dog years, which I do, 5G is in of itself a middle-aged technology. And isn't it about time we got people to actually experience what it really should be instead of what the marketers have promised for about 5 years?
That's true. And Gabriel, what do you think?
I don't know. I think I would disagree with Camille in the sense that I don't think 5G is middle-aged at all. I think it's teenage years at best, really. The way I look at it, we have this sort of notional 10-year cycle for generations. We have at least a 20-year cycle of service technology. And then let's say we blend 5G and 6G together. We're 5 years into a 40-year cycle kind of thing. So that's how I look at it. I think it's pretty early days. I think of a broader point, going back to Camille's comment there, like how do you want to judge the state of an industry? It really depends on who's judging and what you're trying to achieve. Because if we look at it through stock prices, you don't need an analyst. You just go and look at the chart, right? It's going to tell you what it tells you. Anyone could work that out. So it's a question of what is the objective of industry? What's it for? Is it to make CEOs richer and get them their bonus and their options and all of that? Is that the purpose of it? Then, yeah, it's not doing very well. Although somehow, no doubt, these people are making out pretty well anyway. There's money coming out of this industry for sure. It's a huge multi-trillion dollars a year industry in services. So there's money there. Someone's earning it. Someone's taking it. Maybe it's all going back into employees and they're paying taxes and contributing richly to society as well. Who knows what it is, but there's plenty of money in the industry.
Yeah.
So I think the better way to look at it is the industry providing useful and valuable services to its customers, to all of us in our personal lives, our business life, that sort of thing. And obviously it could be quite a lot better, but it is getting better steadily. And I think, as Camille put it, it's a foundational utility, right? So that's what it should be.
And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. If it weren't working, you would notice it pretty quickly, would you not? And personally, I feel very proud when and having been in this industry for a few decades, particularly when I've been privileged enough to do work in emerging markets and former conflict zones, where the implementation of telecoms infrastructure, fixed or wireless, can have a huge difference to social outcomes. And that's been tracked for a number of years in terms of the impact on economies. What distresses me, however, and I live in the UK, one country where aspects of it are being completely overbuilt by some of whom I think who are trying to make a quick buck versus really empowering their local communities. I am distressed that mission is not necessarily being executed evenly around the world, because I do think connectivity is powerful wherever it may be.
And a good point, and ubiquitous connectivity in particular, which we're still, I think, striving towards. On the 5G, just on that, I think we're still in the foothills of proper 5G because without the core, you really struggle. But other parts of the world, as we know, not necessarily in Europe, have been leading the way, I think, particularly.
Indeed, you're quite right. 5G SA. In Singapore, for example, Singapore is a 5G SA nation. And if you speak to, and I spend a lot of my time speaking to enterprises who are the ones who are footing the bill, as the consumers are as well. If you speak to someone like PSA, the Ports Authority in Singapore, they have 5G SA configured in the new port that's being built and some amazing outcomes in terms of efficiency, productivity. Oh, and by the way, sustainability. So, for example, of using some autonomous vehicles to do some of the ferrying of freight, they have a smaller footprint and they use a lot less energy. So there are some benefits, some clear benefits that 5G SA can deliver to enterprises. And I have spoken to a few who have specifically deployed on SA. But there are not enough stories out there and proof points out there yet to convince. And also, I would say that the typical consumer or even enterprise has no clue what 5G SA is, nor indeed should they, really.
No,
they should be focused on, I want this type of outcome, and am I going to get it? And how much do I pay for it?
So another theme of this event will have been AI. But of course, then you have to describe which AI do we mean. We're talking about generative AI or the other types of AI. Did you come across any particular points around that?
I did an entire roundtable on AI with a number of telco executives. So that was interesting. And also off the basis of that conversation and other execs I've spoken to over the past few months on my travels around the world, interestingly, what most of them want to talk about now is not AI in the context of efficiency, but they're driving the conversation towards monetization as well. So what types of new services can I profit from by implementing AI? What new services might be created? And I think that there's some interesting potentials out there around GPU as a service, around better alliances between those that the new AI hyperscalers and those that have got connectivity potentially across the world. You already see alliances from those who've got cheap data centers and lots of cheap power, people in Europe allying with people in Asia. So that's an interesting angle that I've seen emerging, but one of many.
Okay, fantastic. And Gabriel?
Where to start? I mean, obviously, lots of talk about AI. I mean, it's the new thing. I said at the start, the industry's grinding through its visionary things that it set 5+ years ago. And that's really what people are working on. But of course, you've got to have AI just to make it interesting for us all. Lots of executives use it, but essentially it's an American export, really, in the sense that you use AI to, in a nutshell, as a boost your stock price. It doesn't actually work anymore because everyone's doing it, but there's a kind of requisite on all executives. You have to mention AI here and there. And that's why it's essentially across every piece of industry, content, marketing, meeting, it's everywhere.
Yeah. Did you come across anything at the event where it was mentioned?
Well, yeah, I think so. One thing a little bit obliquely to it, there was a really good Q&A with a fellow called Michael Trabia, who is the CEO of Orange Wholesale.
Yes.
Used to be the CTO at the Orange, like R&D or innovation division or something like that. So technical, but move into a business role, which is something a lot of operators and vendors actually seem to do, move executives around in that way as they're progressing. And Inderpreet from Omdia was asking the questions. The question she really asked him was, how do you, in these sort of type leadership roles, how do you take these decisions? What's your decision matrix, essentially, for all these new technology? And he went through it a little bit. Obviously, fiber, 5G. Arno van Preek, Orange, in his keynote, actually went through a little bit the same progress. But he was also saying, it's really difficult. If you go back a few years, not so many, everyone wanted us to do crypto and blockchain. At that point, that was everywhere because that was getting big stock runs in the US market. Was that such a good idea or not? We're a few years later and things just take this natural cycle a bit. Obviously, there is a lot to get into because it is great technology. You have loads of ways to apply it and we could get into all that. I think, ironically, even though I wouldn't call myself a skeptic, but more of a kind of...
I don't put words into your mouth. I could.
Maybe try and, a bit more...
You're a rationalist. You're a rationalist, right, Gabriel?
So even with that involved, the two of my most enjoyable presentations that I had there, I would say, just as sitting in the audience with no particular other agenda, were one from the CEO of Digital Bridge, Mark Ganzi, I think he's called. So that's a massive company. It's hugely funded digital infrastructure. private equity roll-up style company, really. Extremely large, vast amounts of money, buying and consolidating loads of digital infrastructure assets from data centers through to private network operators, all kinds of things. His presentation was in the sort of really best traditions of American kind of bullish attitude and overreach, really.
Yeah.
But it was a terrific presentation. Like, this guy, obviously already mega rich and mega successful.
Yeah.
He just
Made you believe it.
he did. That's what actually made me believe it. But he certainly gave the impression that he believed it and it was going to be great, and he was loving it. He was all in.
Yeah.
And so it had a lot of enthusiasm and it had a lot of kind of energy, right?
Yeah.
And we need that. Some of these people are questionable sanity, the Elon Musks of the world, but we need them. We need those people who have that grandiose idea. That type of energy is important to keep an industry going and galvanized. Even if in the end it may or may not succeed, it still sparks other ideas. So I can only applaud the odd blustering presentation.
Yeah, and I think that's a little bit like Camille mentioned at the beginning. It's like, if an industry and you in your job, if you could just consider, if it's all talked down all the time, all right, you get your salary or whatever, but where's the fun in it? Do we like doing this or not? So I think you have to, as Camille said, we need this energy and vision, even if it doesn't come off, even if it's the next whatever, crypto or what, I don't know, maybe that's come good again someday.
Or metaverse, right? You haven't said that yet.
But that brings me to an interesting point you just made about the enticing new blood into the industry and making it more attractive. So one of the comments from Orange, and I'm not sure which of those two gentlemen you mentioned from Orange's presentation was, but they mentioned that their developers are using generative AI to create code. So that's creating efficiencies and dealing with the, let's say, lack of skills. But also, I think the other thing is, and why telco is not so attractive for people, particularly in the AI world, is that you need to get sensible data to work with in the first place. So that's a challenge in telco, as we know, to get that down to the network.
I'm going to disagree slightly. One thing that telcos have got, they have reams and reams of data. Fantastic data. And if we are now hiring, don't forget, telcos like Orange, like Deutsche Telekom, like BT have a long history of apprentices that they bring people into the industry, they train them up. It might have been once shimmying up a pole or splicing fiber, and now it's going to be coding. And by the way, at university today, everyone is learning how to use generative AI. It is mandatory, if you're in the software game, to use it to be more efficient and write hopefully more elegant code. So if those people are the new apprentices in the telecoms industry, I have great faith in what we could be able to do, but we're not going to be able to do it alone. And that's why partnerships are really important with developers outside of the telecoms industry and other industries and others. Nobody can, no man is an island, so to speak.
Absolutely. I think you're right around the initiatives of the telcos. But I guess the point I was trying to make is I was told by someone who works in this sort of space is that in telco, it's very difficult to, even though there's lots of data there, that in itself is a good and a bad thing, right? Double-edged sword in that, is it the right data and is it the right quality of data before you can use AI? And we in telco spend a lot of time having to enrich the data or get it to something. Whereas if you went to Amazon or you went to one of the hyperscalers, let's say, it's readily available because it's already in the cloud and easy. Then you can do the analytic more easily. Whereas our data sets are often in different places. So that was a point. The other one which was raised was the Orange mentioned about using AI for reduction in tickets, trouble ticketing, that sort of thing was another use case, which I don't think is generative AI. I think that was more sort of operational AI data, which is more aligned with what I think you mentioned. So those I thought were two efficiencies. Sorry, do you want to come back on that at all, Camille?
I was going to add one piece, which is actually the democratization of AI beyond networking and engineering and customer service staff, actually into the sales function as well, sales and marketing function.
Yeah.
And I have noticed, I have several examples and discussions of people who are allowing sales folk to use Copilot, and they're being much more efficient in understanding who the customers are, who the targets are, and being more effective in building campaigns that deliver results. And I think that's an important lesson, is to make sure that we democratize this across the organization.
Yeah. Sorry, Gabriel, you wanted to add something there, I think?
Yeah, there was so the Mark Ganzi presentation from Digital Bridge, that was all about the energy consumption, how much data centers would be needed, so a big growth story.
Right.
As a fellow, the other one I liked is very related to what you're just talking about. It was, I don't actually know how you pronounce his name.
Give it a go.
Detlef Nauck, who is, I'm looking at the agenda now.
Oh, he's from BT,
AI
the one from BT, wasn't it?
Science research at BT.
Yes.
Yes, he gave great presentations. One of those where it's what I would say, it was very authoritative. This fella obviously knew his material, but he made it simple enough that I could follow along and I could stay with him and get the story. He had quite a good example about where they use it in a development environment, things like that. I think to one broader comment, there's all these examples that we're talking about. You can optimize this process or that customer interaction or this or that and make it a little bit better. You can make it 10% better, 5%, 15, 20, whatever. You can make it a little better. And that's really, I think, what at the moment, this is what AI is going to amount to, a series of small improvements. And so it's being competitive across all of these fronts, working really hard on it to eke out these incremental gains, essentially. It's the only way the sort of AI pitch that's rushing through every industry is going to really add up yet. This kind of notion that everything's going to be different when we wake up next year or 2 years, I don't buy it at all. And it's going to be these kind of incremental improvements that add up to make something meaningful. And that's maybe in the hype of everything. You tend to forget that it's got to be actually implemented into a process. Any of these processes, it's great if that's your job. You've improved whatever. Great. They're all pretty small beer in this overall picture of the telecom business. So I guess it's like this comes out of sport, weirdly, but you have this idea of incremental gains, right? Where all elite teams at the same level, whether it's cycling or Formula One or whatever it is. So the only way to win is to eke out marginal gains on each different part. Better tires, more aero, better AI modeling for your aerodynamics as it happens. And that's how I see this playing into the industry, really. It's going to be plenty of work for everybody because if you don't move, your competitors are going to, and it is going to essentially create a bit better efficient telco industry.
Yeah. Good comments on that. I think another topic which sort of was also, I think, one of the keynotes was the network API initiative that's happening. I had an interesting discussion with a guy called Marcos Kumale, who is actually the project manager of that project as well. So this is basically the Camara story and this announcement that 12 operators have agreed to do a common network API exposure layer for certain APIs, if you like. It's been something that the industry's been doing for a long time, but the whole idea here is to create for a developer one interface and these 12 operators will support it. And then it's Ericsson. There's a joint venture now between the operators who own 50% and 50% will be owned by Ericsson. Again, it still needs to go through the approval stages, and I'm not sure which approval stage it has to do. So it's a floating idea, if you like. My comments on it were that actually it's quite an achievement to get 12 operators who are basically, this is a commercial area of their businesses, to agree on a way of opening their networks in a similar way. And I think that's the thing that sticks in my mind is that someone's been able to galvanize basically herding cats, I guess it is, of some descriptions and egos and get them all to agree on something which has commercial implications. Camille, I see you're nodding. So do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think a lot of very hard work has been done over the past year or so in this network API space, which, by the way, bubbles up every 5 years, pretty much. It's a sort of cyclical thing. Oh, let's expose our wonderful capabilities through APIs, telecom industry. This time, I believe there is a greater chance of success because they are being more rational, more commercially focused. And one has to praise Deutsche Telekom and Ericsson in particular, I think, for bringing other people into the fold. I'm sure others join very quickly to do something very important, which is, let's not remind ourselves, APIs are not magical. They are an elegant means of transferring information or functionality between different entities and platforms, right? That is what they do. And by the way, nearly all enterprises use APIs. They develop them in-house, and 7 out of 10 enterprises use third parties' APIs as well. So the question is here, can any of the network capabilities be made digestible to enterprises and their developers, and also independent developers creating applications that have either a mass market appeal or, let's say, a vertical industry appeal. That's where we're at now. That's the ambition. And to build models where everyone makes some revenue, hopefully directly, but actually most of it will probably be indirect. Most API revenue is indirect, not direct. Yeah. There's a whole other discussion on this. But Gabriel, you probably want to add something.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, really. I think, and especially the last point, the value this will generate will be indirect. That's fundamentally what it's supposed to do. I think it's a really good initiative. I think the industry collectively has to do this. I think this idea of becoming platform businesses in some sense, you have to go and pursue this path. Even if it's moderately successful or not successful, I don't think it's a question that you can't pursue it. It has to be tried and pursued.
Mm.
But what we have to do is really talk and present this, the attractiveness of this, to those who are going to consume it. And so the issue that we have actually is, I think, as I often say, a branding and marketing issue. Network APIs actually do not tell someone, a developer or an enterprise, what the capability is. I can check identity. I can prevent fraud by leveraging the network. I can improve the quality of the speed of your transactions because I can boost network quality, for instance. So there's I think a lot of work that needs to be done to make this digestible to enterprises and developers. And interestingly, I just did a survey of 1,100 enterprises asking them about which a network APIs they may be interested in. If you use the right type of language, you will actually get quite an interesting response. Yes, they're interested in security. They are also interested in the performance aspects of that as well.
Right.
But we really need to do a better job of explaining the why, not the what.
But what I think you're just saying is also speak in their terms and in their language. At the end of the day, you have to bridge that gap, I think, fundamentally. And I think thank you for sharing some of the use cases as well, which was one of the ones I know Deutsche Telekom mentioned on the fraud side is basically, can you let me know whether you think network, this is a fraudulent or not? So as you don't get any more information, that's a yes or no answer on, do you think this transaction is? And they use the base SIM swapping as being one of the identifiers around that. So yeah, anything to add to that, Gabriel, on this topic?
Again, I agree with Camille's point and your point about, how it's communicated, how it's perceived and used by customers or end users in whatever form. Sort of a more out there kind of point on it, though. I think I'm a little bit dismayed at the quality of applications, networked applications on the internet or the web anyway. I feel like the big kind of Cambrian explosion in web and apps and internet and everything that we've lived through the past 20 years, I feel like now it's consolidated down into these big platforms that are essentially resting on their laurels a bit. I don't see all the application experiences now designed for the networks we have to work within their limitations.
Right.
Which is fine because obviously you've got to reach people and so forth. But I don't feel like we've reached anywhere near the quality and depth and usefulness of connected applications and experiences. And so to me, it feels like we're going to also need some inventiveness and creation and ambition on the app side or content side to make these network API thing really sing as well. This sounds a bit trite, but they've got a bit too comfortable. The content and application and all these people have been doing really well, but they've got a bit too comfortable and maybe aren't innovating that much anymore. It's incremental, right? We get a slightly faster scroll with a new phone and a new release of the app. Big wow kind of thing.
I think that leads nicely to the point of, I think the way we're interacting with data and computers is changing as well. Are we sitting here still typing in? Is it voice commands? Is it a orchestrated experience, maybe across apps, AI we were talking about as well? So you can basically put in a request, and that contextualization, I think, across apps is maybe something which will give you a more rich experience. I think that sort of way of...
Yeah, maybe. I honestly can't claim to really have that much insight into like where it should go. So I'm just complaining without a solution, honestly. But again, it will Friday
afternoon. So.
It'll take us back to the AI type conversation in a minute and delivering these AI.
But I think there's very much a nub of something very profound there. If we think about the telecoms industry, that we are talking about here for decades, for more than a century. The value has been predicated on this act of connectivity. And that remains profoundly important. But ultimately, real value can be built on something else, which is experience, digital experience. After all, you can have connectivity and you can have an application that performs poorly. An application that performs poorly can be as serious and annoying as an actual outage. And so I think what this industry, building on what Gabriel was saying, this industry needs to understand a little bit more about what is good or bad at digital and actually increasingly cyber physical experience. And that's where there is a potential to build extra value, particularly if we are going to get into more virtual environments, actually, to do that credibly. If we're going to include touch, I'm an engineer and I don't want to actually go out into the field, but I can send a probe that can feel whether this piece of equipment is out of kilter or not. Then I'd like to know that's quite an accurate feeling that I'm remotely through that wide area network. Then I can diagnose the problem more efficiently. That's a real example that we could consider going forwards. And the value there is the experience, the veracity of the experience, not the mere act of connectivity. That's where we need to move to.
Very good. Anything to add to that, Gabriel? Or
No, just again, I'd agree. I think the kind of cool thing about it is there is a lot of runway, right? There's a lot of things that can be better. And it's going to be some sort of code. Networks are in some ways outstripping the applications at the moment. I suppose that's a little bit what I wanted to say. Albeit, I do understand that we need better coverage. Or any phone companies listening, could sort your coverage out.
building on what you're just saying about we are moving forward with the networks, I don't know if you came across it, but I feel there's an underswell in the world of cloud. Now, I happen to be, I don't know if you were in it yourself, there was a panel discussion of telco to techco, where we had Orange, Telenor, NTT, and Deutsche Telekom present. And is it Silver, I think it's called, is the Orange initiative around an open source cloud platform. And then you have the CCAS from Deutsche Telekom. But where I want to go with this is that I think operators, having worked with the hyperscalers for a number of years, and now also thinking about, particularly on the network side, building their own cloud capability, then they're trying to get the vendors to put their applications on their cloud. And what that particularly leads to is a total change in dynamic of the way operators have worked with the vendors, because up to now they like to see blood if a vendor fails or something doesn't go right, and therefore they've preferred this monolithic single supplier stack. But if you move to this horizontal area, the horizontal and the cloud has to be run by the telco if that's what they want, and the vendor is then just sitting on top as part of that architecture, if you like, and therefore they can't just blame the vendor if something goes wrong because we're running on their cloud. And just wondered if you picked up that at all, and the telcos are, particularly the big groups, Deutsche Telekom and Orange, if they could build, and it was mentioned by the CTIO of Tele2, who says we've consolidated from 3 cores down to 1. If you look at Deutsche Telekom or Orange's groups, we've got X number of opcos. If they could create one cloud, telco cloud, I'm talking about for the applications, that there's something in that as well. But anyway, I just wanted your views on that, because I don't think all clouds are equal.
I caught some of that session. You've raised like dozens of issues, and these are the sorts of things that we spend months and years working on. For the purpose of this conversation, I back out of it a bit. And if we go back to where we were talking about a moment, the importance of connectivities to society, to life, to industry, to business, everything, then from the people providing that, the telecom operators, such a big part of what they do is about resiliency and reliability. And this, I think, is probably, I don't know if it's the most important trend in telco networking, or it's in the top 3 certainly at the moment, which is how these networks and facilities are designed to be robust and resilient. And so when you start looking at it from that point of view, then clearly operators do need to understand what's happening in the networks. They need to control the fundamental technologies. They do need to understand the stack top to bottom. Not to say they have to do everything themselves and get into all the detail, but I don't think if you are a tier 1 service provider in your market that you can put critical services, super critical infrastructure, all of this. I think people forget how important and how much deep engineering work goes into this. Telcos, they have to be cautious. They're right to be. I'm certainly very glad they are, and that they're in control and owning it and want to understand the problem and be in charge, essentially. And so a little bit like in terms of, there was a few years ago, cloud companies are going to come in and we're going to put our workloads on there and we'll be happy. I just don't see how that fits with their requirement to be robust and resilient. So I think that's another way of looking at it. And that's from that point of view, then the industry has to be able to afford and fund this engineering.
True. Just to come back to you on that. In a way, that's what I picked up from the discussion. They just seem to have this idea of it's in the cloud. Once in the cloud, it's okay. And I was thinking, but cloud is not cloud. And which cloud? And there's on-premise, there's hybrid, private, all these, there's sovereignty issues. Just like this conversation was, once you go on the cloud, a bit like we're saying, once you got AI in, it's going to be like a magic bullet type of thinking. And I was thinking, this is a bit superficial. But anyway.
Yeah, I didn't get that impression from it, I must say. I thought it was, the impression I had was that it was a deep commitment and deep thought going all the way through. And
no, I have to agree. I think the service providers are far more sophisticated around cloud than they were some years ago. Remember, they started about 15 years ago thinking they could actually rival hyperscalers by building their own clouds, and fast realized they could not copy those economies of scale. That's one aspect. Today, service providers, from a monetization perspective, do have opportunities in the sovereign cloud. And so you do see companies like Orange with support, building sovereign clouds, adhering to regulation for certain workloads that cannot go anywhere else. And that might be associated with ministries of defense or other really critical information and infrastructure. I think they also have a more sophisticated understanding that in some cases, some workloads can go to a public hyperscaler. They might have a dedicated instance or something like that. And for a number of years, they've been using that. It might be for some media type of functionality, something that's less mission critical. So I think there is a new, increasingly nuanced understanding of which hyperscaler you work with for certain things for internal use, and those that you partner with also for external monetization as well. So there are multiple strategies going on in cloud.
Yeah. And the sovereign cloud is only a short step to sovereign AI as well. Like they're in that
very good
close
point
on the continuum.
So given this podcast is about sustainability and tech for good as well, I think we can't leave it remiss to not mention the topic of sustainability. Any presentations or any feelings or comments from the show where you heard people mentioning it? I have a few here myself, but maybe starting with Camille, did you feel there was any announcements about how they're actually achieving it?
I think what's interesting is it's part of the discussion. It's not something that's shoehorned into the discussion. Network X in Paris is a European show. Let's be quite clear. It's very much a European show. And I think that's why sustainability is considered, it's not an unusual thing to shoehorn into the conversation. And also, if you were to look at the annual reports of service providers, particularly in Europe, you will find they provide more granularity about their sustainability performance than they do on some of their financial performance, in point of fact. So it's not something that is overlooked and underplayed. And if you could argue the host operator, Orange, is a very clear proponent of that, talks about sustainability in a number of, you probably heard them speak at the show about some of the efforts that they were making. I think it's a very serious commitment. And the interesting thing is it is considered across different parts of the business. And if we're going back to AI, we have a big ethical issue, right, emerging potentially with the obviously power utilization of AI against is that power green or not? And who does that benefit? So there is a bit of existential angst that I think the industry is going to have to face pretty soon.
Yeah, good point. And Gabriel?
Again, Camille said, I think the key thing is as a European show, it reflects European priorities and preoccupations. And what I'm a European, I think we are all Europeans here at some level. But quite a good example, you could look at this a little differently. If I go back to the Mark Ganzi presentation, Digital Bridge. So he went through a lot of the whole thing about data center build. And so we have these European priorities and targets. I think service providers and vendors are doing a really good job. I've sat through many detailed more than presentations, deep workthroughs of how different vendors and service providers are meeting these goals. I think they do a brilliant job, better than just about every other industry almost. And it's extremely encouraging. However, out of the blue comes AI, right? And it's just blowing all these
just initiatives sort of.
Like it's out of the water.
Yeah.
It's a massive curveball to your energy efficiency strategy.
Yeah.
And it's out of the blue. I think Microsoft's the good example. It was making these year-on-year improvements. Things were getting better, even with building a lot of data centers. Out of the blue, this energy and numbers have blown right up, and we're in a sort of a different kind of a game. And quite how you marry these things is a hard thing to think about, honestly, because it's not stopping, whether you like it or not. The data center build and the power draw of these AI clouds is going through the roof.
And that's why you're seeing some of these interesting alliances between, let's say, telcos in Asia and data center builders in the Nordics, because there's clean energy there. And you have a submarine cable with low latency that could move those workloads. I heard recently that the government of Ethiopia was trying to set itself up as a place for AI workloads and data centers to be built. Now consider not only the power, but the water that data centers actually need to operate in a country like that where people don't have enough water to drink. When I say we have an existential crisis coming up because of AI, I'm not kidding.
No, you make a very good point. I was at another show the other day, Capacity Europe, and the comment from the French representative who said the one KPI we as humans need to be aware of in data centers is water consumption, because fundamentally it's existential between humans and the data center. If you like, can I live or do you survive? And no, it's, as you say, totally existential. Obviously, there's some obvious wins from the industry, which are 2G and 3G being switched off, which we all know about. Anyway, Gabriel, you're going to say?
Yeah, the things you're talking about. Again, the digital bridge presentation, just to balance it, give a bit of context. He's thinking about power in a completely different way, which is that there isn't enough of it. So his comment was the top 5 European data center markets are now power limited. You can't even roll out a new data center because there just isn't the power supply. Top 3 markets in the US are also shut down to new data centers.
Yeah.
He mentioned again the point Camille made. This puts the emphasis on connectivity into data center connectivity, of course, and clean power, location, all these types of things, which does nicely bring us back to networking.
That's the new arms race.
That's it. And the data centers and connectivity are all now joined by the hip and be more so going forward. But anyway, thank you very much for making your time available for this podcast. And I think we're looking forward to hopefully a bigger and better Network X next year as well. So I'd like to thank you again from my side.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers. Thank you, Ian.
Thanks for taking the time to listen to our new podcast. If you have any feedback or know of any stories to be told involving digital technology and telecoms doing good, then please do let us know via our email, getinTouch@digiteltalk.com. Also, feel free to send us a message on LinkedIn. It'd be great to hear from you.
Before we go, if you've enjoyed today's episode and would like to support the podcast, then don't forget to give us a follow and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Also, if you'd like to leave us a review or share it with your colleagues, it really helps us on the channel. Thanks so much for being a part of our audience today, and hopefully you'll join us next time.
That's all we've got time for, so it's goodbye from me.
And that's goodbye from him.
Bye
for now.
now.